just a little over a year.
Do you fear that Rick James or his associates will come after you? Is that why you're in disguise now?
Absolutely, yes. Very much.
I was very probably upset with him more than anything, and, like any artist, man, I mean, who comes and, then another artist, comes up and kind of like,
They called him the king of punk funk, a wild icon, a super freak. But before his death in 2004, Rick James whispered a truth that shook everyone who heard it. The world never knew who I really loved and who I was hiding from. For decades, the industry painted Rick as a sex-crazed outlaw, but behind the drugs, the scandals, and the chaos was a man living a double life. A man terrified that one forbidden desire could destroy everything he built. From Secret Lovers in 1968 Toronto, to Hidden Nights in Studio 54, to a 3-day disappearance in Minneapolis with a superstar no one dares name. Rick carried a secret the music industry worked overtime to bury. And when he finally tried to tell the truth, the final 27 pages of his memoir vanished after his death. Tonight, we open the story Rick James never got to finish, the one he feared would cost him his life. Chapter 1. Born into Chaos. Every story about Rick James begins the same way, with the danger, the fire, the chaos. But the truth is that the chaos didn't begin when the world met him. It began long before the fame, long before the scandals, long before the funk. It began in a cramped duplex on East Ferry Street in Buffalo, New York, where a skinny little boy named James Ambrose Johnson Jr. learned that the world was not built to protect him. Rick was born in 1948, the third of 8 children. His father, a singer who never made it out of the bars, walked out when Rick was barely old enough to understand what abandonment meant. The only things he left behind were his records and a ghost of talent that Rick would later turn into armor. His mother, Mabel, was left to raise 8 children alone. By day, she worked odd jobs. By night, she worked in the underbelly of Buffalo's street economy, running numbers, working for bar owners, negotiating with men the neighborhood kids feared. Rick learned fast. Survival required charm, silence, and the ability to read danger before it hit the room. Neighbors would later say that Rick grew up around pimps, hustlers, and washed-up jazz cats. He watched men pass out on couches, watched women slap life back into them, watched deals go wrong, and watched the police show up only when they needed something. In that world, Rick didn't just grow up, he toughened. He learned to fight, to lie, to run, and to perform. He learned that music could distract people long enough to forget how hunger felt. And he learned that secrets, the right secrets, could keep a person alive. But he also learned something else, something darker. In those crowded rooms filled with cigarette smoke and cheap whiskey, Rick realized he was different, not just musically, not just emotionally, different in ways he didn't have language for yet. He found himself drawn to certain boys the same way he was drawn to the rhythm of Marvin Gaye records, quietly, fearfully, tenderly. It was a truth he tucked so deep inside himself that he nearly forgot it, was there. By 16, Rick had already been arrested, already joined a gang, already learned how to slip in and out of trouble like smoke. When the Vietnam War draft came for him in 1965, he didn't wait. He ran. Some say he panicked. Some say he was protecting the last thing he had, his freedom. But the ones who knew him best say something different. Rick left because he already spent his whole childhood fighting for survival. He wasn't going to die for someone else's war. He crossed into Canada, and for the first time, the noise of Buffalo faded into silence. Toronto in the late 60s was a strange paradise, full of artists, travelers, runaways, and musicians who played for the joy of surviving another day. Rick slipped right into that world like he had always belonged there. He joined a band called the Mina Birds, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't hiding from the police, the streets, or the war. He should have felt free, and in some ways, he did. But what happened next was something even Rick never expected. It was 1968 when he met him, the Canadian guitarist whose name never made it into any official biography. The the man Rick would later describe privately as my first real connection. Those who were there recall nights when the two would stay in the studio after everyone else left, playing until sunrise, laughing quietly, speaking in low tones like they were protecting something fragile. One bandmate remembered walking in on them once, sitting close, knees almost touching, speaking in a way he'd never heard Rick speak before. Soft, almost shy. Toronto gave Rick James the space to explore who he might have been if the world had been kinder. And for a moment, he allowed himself to feel something that terrified him even more than the draft notice he'd fled from. Affection. Real affection. The kind that didn't need to be performed. The kind he didn't need to hide behind swagger or bravado. But secrets don't stay safe forever. The relationship, if that's what Rick would have dared to call it, remained a whisper in the walls of their rehearsal space, a truth held only by a handful of musicians who understood how dangerous it would be if anyone in the industry found out. Because the music business in the 1960s had rules carved in stone. You could be an addict, a criminal, a womanizer, a walking disaster. But you could not be a black man who loved men. That was unforgivable. Rick understood this faster than anyone. He saw what happened to artists who didn't fit the image labels needed. He listened to executives speak casually about cleaning up a star's public image. He watched as entire careers were crushed not because of talent, but because of identity. And he learned that if his secret ever surfaced, there wouldn't be a second chance. Not for him, not for anyone like him. So he buried it, deep. So deep he hoped it would suffocate. And to keep it buried, he transformed. He built the persona, the swaggering, loud-mouthed, sexually voracious Rick James. He flirted with every woman in sight, bragged about conquests, drowned himself in bravado. It was a mask made of glitter and fire, a mask so convincing that even he began to believe it. But masks always crack, and his would crack in a way no one could have predicted. By 1974, Rick had returned to the States, hungry for fame, hungry for success, hungry for a life that didn't require running. But he brought something back with him from Toronto, not just talent, not just ambition, but a truth he spent the rest of his life trying to silence, that the first person he ever truly loved was a man. And in an industry that punished that truth more brutally than any addiction, that one secret would cast a shadow over everything Rick James became. Chapter 2. The Rise and the Secret. By the time 1977 arrived, Rick James had clawed his way out of every trap life set for him. Jail time, street hustling, homelessness, deportation scares. He survived them all. But nothing prepared him for what came next. Fame. Real fame. The kind that walks into a room before you do. On March 18, 1977, Rick stepped into Motown Studios on Grand River Avenue in Detroit for his first official meeting. Witnesses say he walked in wearing a fur coat, boots up to his knees, and a grin that dared the world to underestimate him. Berry Gordy wasn't just impressed, he was intrigued. Motown needed a new spark. Rick was gasoline. But behind the swagger, behind the sunglasses, and the loud laugh, something else was happening. Something Rick didn't plan. Something he thought he had buried in Toronto years earlier. It started in April 1977 during the recording of You and I. The band worked late, the studio hot from the old tube amps. Around 2 a.m. an engineer left the control room for a smoke break. When he returned, he saw something he never forgot. Rick standing close, too close, to the keyboardist, a tall, quiet man from Detroit, known for his gentle voice and even gentler eyes. The two were speaking softly, heads bowed together like they were sharing more than chords. The engineer didn't say a word, but the rumor spread, and Motown heard it. By June 1977, Rick was called into a side office, dim lights, blinds half drawn, where a senior Motown executive told him plainly, "Keep your personal life out of this building. You're a star now. Act like one." Rick walked out smiling, but the moment he stepped into the empty hallway, Witnesses say he clenched his jaw so hard his teeth nearly cracked. He knew what the warning meant. He had heard it before. Toronto all over again. But then came Studio 54. Rick's career exploded in late 1978. Mary Jane climbed the charts, and suddenly he was the new face of groove, funk, rebellion. When he arrived at Studio 54 on December 10, 1978, the doorman didn't even check the list. He pulled the rope aside, like Rick was royalty. Inside the club's gold-lit haze, surrounded by disco beats and clouds of cocaine dust, Rick let himself breathe. Here, nobody cared who you loved, at least not publicly. And it was here, in the back corner of the VIP balcony, that Rick met Luis, a 22-year-old dancer from Puerto Rico with silky hair and a smile that sent electricity up the spine. For weeks, the two were inseparable. They danced until sunrise, left the club arm in arm, took taxis without rolling up the windows. And one night, December 28, 1978, 3:12 a.m., a paparazzo captured the moment they stepped out of Rick's limousine, laughing, bodies pressed together. The next morning, that photo was supposed to appear in After Dark magazine. It never did. Motown bought the entire set of negatives and paid the photographer to disappear for 3 months. Rick acted like nothing happened. But people close to him say his mood changed. He started pacing during rehearsals, scanning rooms before entering them, checking every mirror twice. Fame wasn't freeing him, it was tightening around his neck. Still, Rick wanted connection, real connection. And that desire followed him into August 1980 during a show at the Chicago Theater. Backstage was chaos, makeup powder floating in the air, instruments slamming against cases, dancers yelling, managers shouting. But Rick only noticed one person, Marcus, a rising funk vocalist with a smile as bright as stage lights. They had chemistry on stage, but offstage, it was something else entirely. On August 14, 1980, after the encore, a sound technician opened the wrong dressing room door. Inside, Rick and Marcus were kissing, not drunkenly, not recklessly, but softly, gently, like the room didn't exist. The technician froze. Rick didn't. He stepped forward, eyes burning, and whispered, "This stays here. You never saw this." Within minutes, Motown security shut down the hallway, confiscated film, escorted the technician to an office, and made him sign a non-disclosure note, the kind with no official letterhead, only intimidation. That night, Rick didn't go to the after-party. He stayed in his hotel room, staring at the city lights through the window, chain-smoking in silence. Because now it was real. Someone had seen him, someone had proof. And the higher Rick climbed, the greater the danger became. When Super Freak hit the airwaves in July 1981, Rick became unstoppable, a blowing storm of leather, lace, and swagger. The world saw a hypersexual, wild, unpredictable star who bragged about sleeping with hundreds of women. The mask was perfect, too perfect. But inside, friends say he was unraveling. His closest confidant recalled one night in early 1982 in a rented house in Laurel Canyon. Rick had just finished a show and was too wired to sleep. He sat on the floor, back against the wall, staring into a glass of whiskey. And then he said something his friend never forgot. "I sleep with women. To hide, man. I sleep with men to feel. That's the part I can't let them know." His voice cracked when he said "feel." The room was silent. The friend didn't respond. He didn't know how. Rick just wiped his face and added, "Motown will bury me alive if this comes out." And he was right. Motown had already buried smaller things. They would bury him too. As 1982 ended, Rick realized something devastating. The higher the spotlight rose, the deeper his truth had to disappear. He wasn't just becoming a superstar, he was becoming a prisoner of his own image. The stage lights were blinding, the crowds deafening, the fame intoxicating, but none of it could drown the truth he kept trying to suffocate. A truth that wouldn't stay dead, a truth that would soon be used against him in ways he never imagined. Chapter 3: Passion, Fear, and Blackmail. By the time 1983 arrived, Rick James was standing at the peak of his fame, yet he had never felt more exposed. His life had become a tightrope between the man he showed the world and the man he feared the world would discover. The years of hiding were beginning to tremble under the weight of something he could no longer outrun: desire, memory, and the terrifying possibility that someone, somewhere, held the truth in their hands. Everything shifted late one night in January 1983 at the Beverly Hills Hotel. Rick had returned from a recording session at the record plant, his nerves still buzzing from hours of intense work. The hallway outside his suite was unusually quiet, lit only by dim golden sconces that made every shadow look alive. As he approached his door, he saw two men waiting for him. They were strangers. Clean suits, blank expressions, the kind of poise that meant they were used to getting what they wanted. One of them held a slim white envelope. The other stepped forward and showed a photograph without saying a word. It was Rick, caught in a private moment in a Minneapolis studio, sitting close to a young male singer, their bodies angled toward each other, heads touching in a gesture too intimate to be explained away. Rick's smile vanished. The taller man finally spoke, his voice flat and controlled. $25,000. No press. Rick didn't argue. He didn't demand where the photo came from. He paid, quickly, with trembling hands. Not because he was guilty, but because he knew exactly how fast Motown would bury him if this ever leaked. That night, for the first time in years, Rick locked himself in the bathroom and stared at his reflection, wondering how many more secrets were waiting to surface. The fear followed him into the summer of 1984 when he flew into Minneapolis unannounced. Purple rain had turned the city into Prince's kingdom, and Rick, both threatened and fascinated, drifted into town under an alias as if he were escaping something invisible. On July 13th, he checked into the Leamington Hotel using the name Richard Shaw. Staff members later remembered how tense he looked, how he kept glancing over his shoulder, how he seemed to walk faster every time the elevator door closed behind him. That night, Rick vanished from the hotel. No checkout, no message, no trace. 3 days later, at 5:17 in the morning, he returned looking disheveled, eyes glassy, shirt wrinkled as if he had slept in it. Witnesses said he moved like someone stepping out of a dream he wasn't ready to wake from. For decades, rumors have swirled about those missing days. Some say he spent them in a private rehearsal space with a musician connected to Prince. Others insist it was a lover, someone Rick cared for deeply, someone he could only be himself with behind locked studio doors. What everyone agrees on is this: when Rick left Minneapolis, he was changed, more guarded, more watchful, more afraid. That fear only worsened as 1985 unfolded. Cocaine became less of a temptation and more of a shield, a way to quiet the thoughts that stalked him everywhere. Friends noticed he had started checking behind curtains, unplugging phones before speaking, and refusing to undress unless the lights were off. One dancer who toured with him said bluntly, "Rick wasn't afraid of overdosing. Rick was afraid of being outed." It was the kind of truth that makes a man sweat, even in winter. Then came March 1986, the moment everything snapped. Rick had been seeing a young male dancer in Los Angeles, someone charismatic and hungry for fame. Their relationship was passionate, unstable, and fueled by the secrecy surrounding it. One night, after a heated argument, the dancer exploded. He threatened to sell their story to a tabloid. Rick froze as panic surged through him. A scandal like that could destroy not only his career, but everything he had built. Motown intervened within 48 hours, sending 2 executives to negotiate privately. The dancer vanished from the city soon after. He never worked in a major touring company again. When the dust settled, Rick collapsed into a chair, silent, shaking, and cried into his hands. He wasn't afraid of punishment. He was afraid of exposure. By late 1986, Rick was spiraling. Publicly, he played the role of the wild funk rebel, the leather, the rage, the sexual bravado, but behind closed doors, he was falling apart. He picked fights in bars. He destroyed hotel rooms. He slept with strangers simply to feel anything other than fear. One producer said Rick walked into the studio one afternoon looking hollow, eyes lifeless, voice hoarse from nights of whispering into the dark. He wanted to feel powerful, the producer said, because inside he felt hunted. The breaking point came in early 1987 inside a house overlooking the canyon. Rick sat by a window, the Los Angeles skyline glowing beneath him like a field of burning embers. On the table beside him were lines of cocaine, a half-empty bottle of Courvoisier, and a notebook filled with unfinished lyrics. He wasn't writing, he wasn't speaking, he was staring into the city like it was a judge waiting to deliver a verdict. A close friend played guitar softly nearby, hoping to ease the tension. Eventually, Rick put the guitar aside and whispered something almost inaudible. "I keep waiting for someone to destroy me." The friend didn't understand. Rick clarified, voice cracking as if the words themselves were too heavy. "Not the drugs, not the cops. The truth, man, if they find out who I've loved, I'm dead." Then he broke down, not with the loud, dramatic intensity the public associated with him, but with the quiet, suffocating grief of a man who had run out of places to hide. By the end of that year, the truth was clear. The world thought drugs were killing Rick James, but the real poison, the real shadow stalking him, was fear. Fear of being exposed, fear of losing everything, fear of loving someone he was never allowed to name. Rick James wasn't just living a double life. He was drowning in one. Chapter 4. The men he loved and the truth he almost told when the masks finally cracked, and the truth began to surface. By the time the year 2000 arrived, Rick James was no longer the wildfire the world knew in the 1980s. Prison, aging, heart problems, and decades of secrets had worn him down. His voice was raspier, his steps slower, and his eyes, once sharp with rebellion, now carried a quiet heaviness. But beneath that tiredness was something new, a desire to finally tell the truth. It began on a cold night in February 2000, high in the Hollywood Hills. Rick had rented a small recording space, a private studio tucked beside Laurel Canyon. The room smelled of old carpet and warm tubes. The mixer hummed softly. Only one person was with him, a junior sound engineer named Thomas Kelly. As Thomas set up the microphones, Rick sat alone in the corner, adjusting a small handheld recorder. Then, without warning, Rick pressed record. His voice came out low and trembling. "I fell in love with a man in Minneapolis, and I never recovered." Thomas froze mid-step, not daring to breathe. Rick didn't look up. He kept speaking, as though the room were empty. He talked about a night in July 1984, how the city lights reflected in the rehearsal studio mirrors, how he felt seen for the first time, truly seen, by someone who understood the pain beneath the swagger. Then he said something almost inaudible. "I think that was the real me, and I buried him." Thomas later swore that Rick's hands were shaking the entire time. The recording ended abruptly. Rick pocketed the cassette. It was never seen again. Months later, in October 2002, another moment slipped through the cracks, this time during a private interview in West Hollywood. The interview was meant to promote his memoir, but once the cameras were off, Rick asked the producer to stop the tape and give him 5 minutes of honesty. The producer agreed. Those 5 minutes would never air. Rick leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and whispered, "The industry knew my secret, and they used it. Every time I tried to leave, someone would show me a photo, say a name, remind me they were watching." The producer described Rick's eyes as haunted, like someone replaying a nightmare he couldn't wake from. By May 2003, Rick had begun recording personal stories into a private journal, not on paper, but on audio tapes he kept in a locked drawer. One of these sessions took place on May 12th inside a rented home studio in Burbank. As a soft keyboard loop played in the background, Rick paused, then said, "There was a man, the kind of love that doesn't fit in this world. I hurt him. I hid him. I chose my career over the truth. And it's the only thing I regret." Minutes later, listeners could hear Rick's voice break. He cried openly, not the wild, dramatic outbursts people expected, but a quiet, shaking sob of a man carrying a lifetime of shame. The final and most chilling confession came in July 2004, exactly 1 week before his death. A close friend named Patrick Mitchell visited Rick's home in Toluca Lake. It was a hot evening, the kind where the air clings to skin. Patrick later recalled that Rick wasn't high, wasn't drunk, just uncharacteristically calm. They were sitting in Rick's living room, ceiling fan turning slowly above them, when Rick suddenly said, "I'm going to tell the world before they bury me." Patrick asked him what he meant. Rick leaned back, exhaled, and replied, "The part of my life they never let me speak. The men, the love, the truth, all of it." He pointed to a stack of papers on the coffee table. Pages from his unfinished memoir. Patrick flipped through them. The handwriting was uneven, paragraphs crossed out, margins filled with memories that seemed too raw for print. Then he noticed something strange. Where the chapters should have been about Minneapolis, Toronto, Studio 54, the pages had been torn out. Rick died on August 6, 2004, and within 48 hours, the manuscript that remained, almost 200 typed pages, was delivered to his publisher. 27 pages were missing, all of them from the section Rick worked on that last month, all of them dealing with his relationships with men. Nobody ever found the missing pages, not the family, not the publisher, not the estate. Patrick claimed that when he asked about them, someone simply told him, "It's better this way." But he never believed that, because he remembered Rick's final words to him, spoken softly like a confession or a warning, or maybe both. They're going to erase the truth again unless someone keeps it alive. And for the first time, the world understood something devastating. Rick James didn't fear death. He feared dying without ever being known. Chapter 5. The industry's silence. What? The world wasn't allowed to read, and why? When Rick James died on August 6, 2004, the world mourned the wild icon, the funk rebel, the man behind the chaos. But inside the Motown building in Detroit, there was no mourning, only movement. Phones rang, doors closed, files changed hands, and within hours, a quiet, invisible process began, the reshaping of Rick James's legacy. In the first week after his funeral, Rick's family gathered at his Los Angeles home to sort through his belongings. The house still smelled of incense and old vinyl. Notebooks were scattered across desks, half-full bottles of liquor sat beside unfinished lyrics, and dozens of tapes lay inside drawers like trapped voices waiting to be heard. But what his sister and nephew found inside the top drawer of his writing desk was something entirely different. The manuscript he had been working on during the final months of his life. At first, it looked complete, nearly 200 pages, neatly stacked and clipped. But as the family read, page after page, the absence became impossible to ignore. 27 pages were gone. Exactly the 27 pages Rick had told his friend Patrick he wanted to reveal before he died. The pages where he described the men he loved, the nights in Minneapolis, the secret relationship in Toronto, the dancer he almost left everything for. Torn out carefully, cleanly, removed with intention. Not lost, not misplaced. Removed. Nobody in the family could explain who had taken them or when. But one thing was clear. The missing pages had been taken between Rick's death and the manuscript arriving in the publisher's hands. 2 days. A 48-hour window where someone had access, motive, and authority. From that moment, Rick's truth didn't just disappear. It was erased. 1 year later, in late 2005, a Detroit tabloid attempted to publish a small article about Rick's sexuality based on a leaked portion of an early memoir draft. The article never made print. Editors later revealed, anonymously, that they were contacted by representatives with legal weight who strongly advised them to reconsider. They did. The story vanished before it ever reached ink. For years, the silence held, a thick, heavy silence that felt less like respect and more like fear. Then, in 2011, a dancer who had once toured with Rick reached out to an independent filmmaker producing a documentary on 1980s R&B. The dancer insisted on anonymity, meeting only in a shadowed corner of a downtown Detroit cafe. His voice trembled as he spoke, not from guilt, but from the weight of a truth he had carried for decades. Rick loved men, he said. Everyone in the industry knew. They just made sure the public never would. He described the same thing Rick's closest friends had whispered about privately. Warning calls from Motown, hush payments, photographers bribed to destroy negatives, security guards trained to separate Rick from anyone who might expose him. He wasn't allowed to be human, the dancer said softly. He was only allowed to be the wild version of himself, the version they could sell. The interview never made it into the documentary. The filmmaker received an email from a concerned legal liaison advising him to omit the segment for the integrity of the narrative. He complied. The silence endured. Then something broke. In 2015, long after most of the key Motown executives had retired, a former senior executive agreed to an off-the-record interview for a book on 1970s-80s funk culture. The interview was never supposed to be taped, but the writer secretly recorded it. And in that recording, later leaked online, the executive said a sentence that stunned even the most cynical fans. Rick wasn't the only one, but he was the one they had to silence. When the writer asked why, the executive paused, sighed, and replied, "Because he was too big, too loud, too black. And if he came out, the whole damn system would have cracked." It was the closest the world had ever come to an admission, not of Rick's sexuality, but of the deliberate effort to hide it. Still, the full truth didn't surface until 2023, when a box of old Motown financial documents was leaked from a storage unit in Glendale, California. At first, the documents seemed mundane: tour budgets, travel receipts, promotional schedules. But buried in the middle was a folder labeled only PR Contingencies, category red, 1980-1984. Inside were invoices and payment requests issued to tabloid writers, club photographers, and freelance journalists. Several payments were marked for story containment and listed Rick James by his initials. One document, dated June 11, 1982, authorized a payout of $4,800 to a New York photographer for the purchase and destruction of images. Another memo referenced active rumors of inappropriate male associations. Suppress immediately. The most chilling document was a typed directive from late 1981. Protect the brand. Protect the catalog. Personal matters must not endanger commercial viability. It was a clean corporate way of saying, erase who he is, save what he sells. As the leak circulated online, fans were stunned, but those who knew the industry weren't. Because Rick James's life had always been a collision of two forces, the man he was and the man the world demanded he pretend to be. The industry didn't silence Rick because of scandal. They silenced him because of truth. Truth that could have changed his image, his contracts, his value, his power. The truth of a black man loving another man in an era that offered no forgiveness for it. Rick died fearing that the world would never know him. And in many ways, he was right. So now we're left with the pieces. The missing pages, the sealed interviews, the hush payments, the secrets buried under corporate signatures. We're left with a man who lived loudly on stage but silently off stage. A man whose greatest fear wasn't prison, overdose, or death. It was love. The wrong kind of love, in the wrong era, in the wrong skin. Rick James was not destroyed by drugs, fame, or ego. He was destroyed by a world that told him the truth inside him was unacceptable. And as we close this chapter, one question rises above all the others. If Rick James, one of the loudest, boldest, most unapologetic artists of his generation, had to hide his heart to survive, then how many others were forced into the same silence? How many stories were rewritten? How many files were buried? How many pages were torn out before anyone could read them? This was not just a scandal. This was a tragedy. The tragedy of a man whose music shook the world, but whose truth the world never allowed to exist. And if you believe this story deserves to be told in full, if you believe the truth should outlive the silence, then stay with us, because this is only the beginning.